Moving on to the Air Temple stuff, Jinora not only gets to display more talent and strength of character this season, but she also gets a love interest in the form of Kai. He's a pretty likable addition to the cast, an orphan thief whose new airbending allows him to pickpocket people and slip out of trouble more easily than ever. But he's never too much of a selfish weasel. Ultimately, he's a nice kid and a skilled, reliable ally when it really counts. Boomy is quite happy to be an airbender, as one would expect after he's expressed more than once that he felt like a disappointment to Aang for not being born with airbending. His fighting remains as comically improvised as always, and I enjoyed seeing him and Kaya getting more to do this time. Kaya's a pretty awesome waterbender, so it was cool to see her get some real fight scenes finally. You seriously feel how much this chance to finally really restore the Air Nation means to Tenzin. In the early scene where the whole prospect sinks in and brings him to tears of joy and reverence, in his disappointment when so many people refuse to be part of it, in his frustration when educating the new airbenders isn't going well, but most of all in his big stand against the Red Lotus. He's absolutely determined to protect his family, his culture, all that he cherishes, determined to fight this threat off with everything he's got. It's by far Tenzin's most badass, applause-worthy moment to date. Now for the villains. As I said in my Book 2 review, I think Unalaq was a more interesting villain than people give him credit for, but with that said, the Red Lotus are a big step up, in terms of sheer coolness if nothing else. Zahir is an airbender, and in addition to the gliding and blasting opponents with gusts of air that we've seen since Aang's day, he demonstrates a couple other airbending techniques we've never seen before. One of them quite chilling, and another that even an airbending master like Tenzin didn't seem to believe was possible. Ghazan is an earthbender who can turn rock into lava, which I guess is usually something only an avatar can accomplish, but I don't know, I'm not too baffled to see a non-avatar earthbender doing it. Waterbenders can control the temperature of their bendables, routinely turning water into ice, so why shouldn't a talented earthbender be able to conjure the heat and pressure to turn earth into lava? Ming Hua is an armless waterbender who fashions water arms for herself that she can do all kinds of kick-ass things with. Grabbing people with them, swinging around with them, forming whips, hooks, drills, and blades with them, or making extra water arms to fight in a more monstrous octopus style. She's also voiced by Gray Delisle, who voiced Azula in Avatar, one of the spirits in Korra Book 2, and younger Lin Beifong here in Book 3. And finally, Pali is a firebender with the same ability to create explosions just with an intense stare that Combustion Man, or Sparky Sparky Boom Man, had back in Avatar. People have pointed out that despite their cool, distinct looks and abilities, there's ultimately not that much to these guys as characters. And yeah, apart from the main villain Zahir, none of them are particularly complex. But while I certainly would have loved to see each of them be as richly developed and three-dimensional as possible, I also kind of like how simple they and their goals are as is. They're part of a shadowy secret society with a common mission and philosophy, so focusing on them less as individuals has the kind of cool effect of making them seem like not so much four villains, but one idea. One menacing idea with lots of devotion and power to assert itself with. They're not completely devoid of personality, though. Ghazan in particular seems like he'd be kind of a cool, mellow guy to hang out with when he's not busy overthrowing nations. And Pali's backstory is touched upon briefly during a pretty tender moment between her and Zahir. It's not much, but with the way it's written and performed, it does feel stronger than you would have thought based on how little interaction we've seen between them prior. If not the romance, you'll probably at least believe the loyalty they're getting across. In fact, every now and then I did feel an enjoyable sense of camaraderie in this group. Brief though the interactions may be, something about the way they talk to each other, little comments they make, bits of levity even during prison escapes and fights, this really does feel like a group of old friends, longtime comrades who have been through awesome missions and adventures together in the past, almost like an older, darker Team Avatar. I like that. I also like how Zahir uses the immortalized teachings and philosophies of airbenders like Guru Lahima and ancient groups of wise men like the original Order of the White Lotus to justify the Red Lotus's mission. representing how different interpretations of mythology, historical figures, religions, etc., and the perceived intentions behind them are used by people in real life to justify their actions and assert their views of what's right and wrong. And the chaos that can and will ensue from that is of course represented here as well. One last noteworthy thing about Book 3's villains: they're the first in this series we see successfully killing someone. Sort of. Sure, in Book 1 we had what may have been the lieutenant's death, and the apparent murder-suicide after that, but the death I'm referring to is not as quick and arguably uncertain as those, nor is it one of those mysterious, quasi-magical demises that are much easier to get away with in family shows, like the wrath of the ocean spirit dragging you away, or being purified by spirit bending and vanishing. No, this is one human being murdering another. The only fantastical thing about it is the fact that it's done with bending, and the victim even has a moment to suffer and process what's happening before they're finally finished. And that's not even the only death in this season. There's a couple more near the end, which are also pretty nasty ways to go, albeit quicker ones. But of course the deaths are still handled with the kids in the audience in mind. No on-screen blood or dismemberment, no actually showing and holding on a lifeless body, which apparently is only okay if it's already been dead for a while, if Professor Zay in Book 2 is any indication. And finally, no having characters actually explicitly refer to them with words like killed, murdered, or assassinated. So the creators are allowed to kill a character, even in a pretty painful-looking way, but actually using those ugly words is going too far. Unless the audience knows the character in question isn't really dead, as we see when Korra thinks someone she loves is dead when we know they're not, so she does get to use the word killed. Kind of a silly way of doing things if you ask me, but I'm not the network, so what do I know? One last thing to mention before my closing thoughts: Old Man Zuko! Great to see Zuko again. He doesn't get as big a role as I would have liked, but since Season 4 is apparently going to be set largely in the Fire Nation, or so I hear, they probably wanted to give Zuko an established presence in the show before that. And his existence in this story doesn't feel wasted at all. There's a pretty funny scene where he mentions hiring Combustion Man back in Avatar, and a nice scene where he advises Korra, being an old friend of Aang's. He also has a bitchin' dragon now. What's not to love about that? Overall, The Legend of Korra Book 3 Change feels like the product of creators who, after some difficulty with Book 2, finally have a clear vision of how to proceed with the second half of the series, now that the events of Book 2 have successfully pushed the story, characters, and world in the necessary direction. The season lives up to its title, delivering changes both on a personal level for our heroes, and on a global level with the reborn Air Nation, turmoil in the Earth Kingdom, and spirits coexisting with the world again. And the finale promises even more change to come. I guess since the Season 2 finale seemed to be hyping up how drastically having the spirits around would change the world, ushering in a whole new era and whatnot, I was a tad disappointed by how little bearing the spirits turned out to have on the events of this season. There's the vine problem in the city. We see spirits just kind of meandering around here and there, and even lending a helping hand occasionally, but they don't have much presence in the story beyond that. I figure that, like Zuko, they may have a bigger role in the next season, though. Apart from that nitpick and how the villains maybe could have used a little more backstory and fleshing out, I can't think of much that honestly bothered me about Season 3. For lack of a better way of putting it, everything functions really well. The narrative is well crafted, the conflicts are interesting, the action is awesome, the characters' development and dynamics with one another feel more natural and compelling than ever, and it ends on such a beautifully bittersweet, emotionally complex note. I dare say, in a lot of ways, it's arguably the strongest season yet, and leaves me very excited to see what's next. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to reviewing the upcoming, presumably final season, Book 4, Balance.